battered the Turks and Caicos Islands early Friday, and Cuba evacuated tourists from beachside resorts as the fearsome storm continued a rampage through the Caribbean that has killed at least 11 people, with Florida in its sights. Waves as high as 20 feet, 6 meters, were expected in the Turks and Caicos. Communications went down as the storm slammed into the islands, and the extent of the devastation was unclear. The first hurricane warnings were issued for parts of southern Florida as the state braced for what could be a catastrophic hit over the weekend. Following in Irma's wake was Hurricane Jose, with some of the islands hit hardest by Irma in its expected path. Irma weakened from a Category 5 storm to Category 4 on Friday morning, with maximum sustained winds near 155 miles per hour, 250 kilometers per hour. But it remained a powerful hurricane. Irma rolled past the Dominican Republic and Haiti on Thursday and spun along the northern coast of Cuba on Friday morning. Thousands of tourists were evacuated from low-lying keys off the Cuban coast Thursday in anticipation of 20-foot storm surges. Buses loaded with tourists began streaming out of Santa Maria, Cayo Coco, Cayo Guillermo and other keys dotted with all-inclusive resorts. All residents of the area were under mandatory evacuation orders from the Cuban government, which was moving tens of thousands of people from vulnerable coastline. French, British and Dutch military authorities rushed aid to a devastated string of Caribbean islands where at least 11 people were dead and thousands homeless. Warships and planes were sent with food, water and troops after the hurricane smashed homes, schools and roads, laying waste to some of the world's most beautiful and exclusive tourist destinations. The first islands hit by the storm were scenes of terrible destruction. French Prime Minister Edouard Philippe said Thursday that 4 people were confirmed dead and about 50 injured on the French side of St. Martin, an island split between Dutch and French control, where homes were splintered and road signs scattered by the fierce winds. The cafes and clothing shops of the picturesque seaside village of Marigot were submerged in brown floodwaters. The toll could rise because rescue teams had yet to get a complete look at the damage. Looting was reported in Saint Martin. Annie Girardin, Minister for France's overseas territories, described on BFM television Friday scenes of pillaging of televisions as well as food and water. She lamented how people can take advantage of the distress of others and said it's essential for police to restore order and ensure urgent care for victims. The U.S. Consulate General in Curacao said it believes about 6,000 Americans are stranded on St. Martin. It said it was working with the U.S. and other governments to try to figure out how to get the Americans off the island either by air or boat. Frantic Americans were calling home to relatives to try to get them off the island ahead of Hurricane Jose. At least 4 people were killed in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and officials said they expected to find more bodies. Authorities described the damage as catastrophic and said crews were struggling to reopen roads and restore power. 3 more deaths were reported on the British island of Anguilla, as well as Barbuda and the Dutch side of St. Martin. The hospital on St. Thomas was destroyed and dozens of patients were being evacuated to St. Croix and Puerto Rico by the U.S. Coast Guard. Local officials said a U.S. Navy hospital ship was arriving as early as Friday to care for unknown numbers of injured, and 2 Air Force C-130's transport planes were bringing in food and water. Power lines and towers were toppled, leaves were stripped off plants and trees. A water and sewage treatment plant was heavily damaged and the harbor was in ruins, along with hundreds of homes and dozens of businesses. Governor Kenneth Mapp imposed a 6 p.m. curfew. The primary focus for now is making sure people have meals, water and shelter, Mapp said. An event of this magnitude is very chilling. Irma also slammed the French island of St. Barts, tearing off roofs and knocking out electricity in the high-end tourist destination. French Interior Minister Gérard Collomb said 100,000 food rations were sent to St. Barts and St. Martin, the equivalent of 4 days of supplies. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte said the storm caused wide-scale destruction of infrastructure, houses and businesses. There is no power, no gasoline, no running water. Houses are underwater, cars are floating through the streets, inhabitants are sitting in the dark in ruined houses and are cut off from the outside world, he said. Big waves smashed a dozen homes into rubble in the Dominican fishing community of Nagua, but work crews said all the residents had left before the storm. Officials said 11,200 people in all had evacuated vulnerable areas, while 55,000 soldiers had been deployed to help the cleanup. In Haiti, 2 po.